Hello and welcome to Agri-History. In this episode, we end our series on apples and move on to cherries. To begin, let's talk about the natural history of cherries. But before we do that, next we must define what a landrace is. A landrace is a population of plants or animals that have adapted to a human population in a local area. This population is usually widely diverse in genetics. Cherries are an ancient crop that's long been valued because it has the status of being one of the first fruit to ripen. There are two major groups of cherries: sweet and sour cherries. The reported center of origin for these cherries is an area that includes Asia Minor, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. The progenitor of the major cherry varieties arose in Central Asia, with the sweet, sour, and Russian ground cherry likely being derived from that primordial species. Sour cherry is believed to have been formed through natural crossbreeding between ground cherry and sweet cherry. As sweet and sour cherries spread throughout Europe, many variant populations evolved within this species, with vast variation of cold tolerance, tree habit, and fruit and leaf traits. These variants may have developed due to continued crossbreeding of sweet, sour, and ground cherry. The continual crossbreeding between sour cherry and its progenitor species had negative reproductive effects on sour cherries. The sour cherry variants have reduced fertility capacity typically due to irregular meiosis caused by an unbalanced genome. This crossbreeding has also granted the sour cherry a greater level of genetic diversity, a wider range of sour cherry shapes, such as sour cherries that look like sweet cherries and sour cherries that look like ground cherries. It is likely that some of the cherry cultivars of Russia and Eastern Europe were hybrids between sweet and sour cherries. The Duke cherry cultivars being one such example. Now let's talk about the rootstocks of cherries. The main rootstocks in cherries are Prunus mahaleb, which is used as tart cherry and sweet cherry rootstock. The other one is Mazard. Mazard is a sweet cherry seedling that has been used as a rootstock for sweet cherry production. The cherries were likely a food source for ancient Europeans. This is due to the fact that cherry pits have been found in cave settlements that date back to 4000 to 5000 BC. Cherries were also cultivated for fruit production by the time the Greek Empire began around 300 BC. The Romans were also credited with introducing cherry cultivation to Britain in the 1st century. Very little is known about the development of cherries before the 16th century, but some early records describe cherry cultivation around this period, and many old sweet cherry cultivars can be traced back to German origins. From ancient times to the 1600s, many landraces arose that were identified with specific locations. Much of the cherry's genetic diversity is represented by the collections of these old landraces. In many cases, landraces were exchanged between communities, and as a result, it is quite common for a landrace variety to have multiple names. In Europe, much of the production of sweet and sour cherry is still from the old landrace groups Schneider sweet cherry and Chateau Morel sour cherry. European countries with a lot of landrace diversity for cherry have many breeding programs, using the landraces as a means of breeding new cherries. All of the sour cherries of today are either landrace selections or one generation removed from a landrace selection. Early settlers brought cherry seeds and grafting material to North America when they settled there. In the mid-1800s, the Llewellyn brothers from Iowa went to Oregon with numerous grafted cherry cultivars. Seth Llewellyn became interested in growing cherry seedlings for pollination purposes and to breed new cultivars from those seedlings. He selected Bing, which is still the leading sweet cherry cultivar in North America. Other important cultivars that came from this breeding process were Lambert and Republican, which is the leading pollen-producing variety. One of the biggest advances in sweet cherry breeding happened with the introduction of self-fertility in sweet cherry. Two researchers, Lewis and Crow, used irradiated Napoleon pollen to fertilize Emperor Francis. One of the mutated variants was called S4. S4 has a mutation allow the plant to self-pollinate. This cultivar was released under the name Stella. Stella was not suitable for commercial production, unfortunately, so it was used as a breeding parent in cherry breeding programs, allowing the breeding of cherries that can self-pollinate. The cultivar Sweetheart became very important in global sweet cherry production. This is one of the descendants of Stella. Stay tuned for part 2 where we discuss different cultivars of sweet cherry. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay lit, fam.